good to be back with you. If you don't know who I am, you might be thinking, who is this guy? Where'd he come from? A few minutes ago, when Darcy was praying before the kids were dismissed, he quickly prayed for Greg. That's me. So that's who he was referencing, in case you didn't catch that. I've been working with the board and with the staff a little bit over the last few months, and during this whole journey of transitioning through what you've been going through as a congregation, excited about the potential of next weekend. But I'm also glad to be back making one more contribution to this summer series, Encounters with Jesus. Now, by design, this series was intended to help you as a congregation focus on the main thing, which is Jesus, his teaching, and his ways. But it's also a series, by the way it's structured, intended to give the multiple communicators who would be speaking this summer an opportunity to speak on texts that they find particularly meaningful to them. And that's certainly the case for me today. This is a text I'm going to go to here in a minute that is one of my go-tos, partly because I think it allows me to do what I think I do best, which is to speak at the intersection of faith and scripture and culture. I'd like you to think for just a few seconds about some of what's happening in our culture right now. I'm not going to try to, kind of give you an exhaustive list, but if you think about our culture right now, for sure, the conversation is being dominated by emerging technologies, AI, all that stuff. Every day, it seems like there's another article, another story, something happening around technology. It's also, our culture is being dominated by political polarization, by a lot of challenging financial realities. Not sure if you know about this, but it's also increasingly dominated by a growing number of people who declare themselves to be religious nuns. N-O-N-E, not N-U-N. N-O-N-E, nuns, religious nuns. There's a recent study being done here in Alberta. It was done by something called the Issachar Project, and it's tracing the number of people who identify as religious nuns, and the number is increasing. It's now up to, in Alberta, close to 35%, where it used to be more in the teens and early 20s. And some of these realities are affecting all churches, including churches like this one. So when I end up in conversations about our current reality, the ministry environment we're in right now, what's pressing on us and how we ought to respond, and also where the opportunities lie, one of my favorite quotes to pull out is this one from an Alliance Seminary professor from New York named Rob Reimer. And I want to put this on the screen for you. Reimer says this. He says, more people are exploring Jesus today out of a sense that they're broken and in need of healing and wholeness than out of a sense that they're sinners needing a Savior. More people are exploring Jesus today out of a sense that they're broken and needing healing and wholeness than out of a sense that they're sinners in need of a Savior. And my own sense, my own experience tells me that Reimer is onto something. I've been pastoring in Alberta for a long time, and I see this reality. I feel this reality. I spend more of my time around non-religious people these days than religious people. And when we get into conversations about faith, hardly ever does the conversation turn to things like the authority of Scripture. Hardly anybody asks me to make a case for faith or a case for Easter. Hardly anybody is interested in an apologetic like evidence that demands a verdict. Like that kind of stuff is hardly being talked about. But on pretty much a daily basis, I get calls and I get text messages and I get emails from people who are battling anxiety and depression and all kinds of mental health struggles. I have weekly meetings with church and community members who are so deep into relational conflict that they've lost hope. Lots of conversations with people who are battling addictions. It's not uncommon that I'm talking to people who are expressing to me a desire not to be here anymore, if you know what I mean. I talk all the time with people who are going through profound loss. Increasing numbers of people are are expressing, hey, something feels broken here. And many of them are wondering whether there's something about the message of Jesus, the person of Jesus, that might put them on a path to health, that Jesus and his teaching and his ways might be something that will contribute to getting them some kind of healing. So keep all of that in the background here this morning as I go to the text I'd like to unpack with you. It's going to be Mark chapter 9. What we're going to read about here in a moment is something that's captured in 3 of the 4 Gospels, but Mark has the most detail, so that's why I'm going to use Mark's version. And as soon as I start reading this, some of you are going to recognize, that's the Transfiguration of Jesus, a pretty famous story. So here we go, Mark 9, starting in verse 2. After 6 days, I'm going to stop right there for just a second. In the days leading up to this event, at least the way Mark has written his gospel, it seems like Jesus has been doing some amazing things. He stretches what seems like barely enough food for one person to feed a whole mass group of thousands. He heals a blind man. He listens to a bunch of people, including some of his closest friends, arguing about who he is or who he isn't. See, they're all speculating about whether or not he's the Messiah, the one they think will get Israel back on top, a leader capable of restoring their nation to the former glory like in the time of David and Solomon. They're looking for someone to kick out the Roman oppressors. But Jesus is doing more and more things that are rather un-Messiah-like. He talks about dying and laying down his life. And he describes a new religious order, and it's far different from the old one. And this causes his disciples, including some of the close guys like Peter, to push back on him. And Jesus, when this happens, he admonishes Peter, and he turns to the others, like the rest of them, as he's kind of in this argument with Peter, and says, if anybody wants to be my disciple, they have to set aside their own interests. And I know this sounds daunting, he says, but if you give up your dreams and follow mine, you'll discover a life that is so much better than anything that you've been dreaming of. That's kind of the lead up to Mark chapter 9. Now let's read here. After 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John with him and led them up to a high mountain where they were all alone. There he was transfigured before them. His clothes became dazzling white, whiter than anyone in the world could bleach them. And there appeared before them Elijah and Moses, who were talking with Jesus. And Peter said to Jesus, Rabbi, it's good for us to be here. Let us put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. He did not know what to say. They were so frightened. Stop there for just a second. This is kind of a humorous part here. If any of the disciples is going to speak first and think second, of course, it's Peter, right? We all know that about Peter. He blurts out a, hey, let's build shelters line. Honestly, it's not as weird as it sounds. Peter is likely thinking about Israel's tabernacle history. For centuries, Jews believed that God's presence was housed in a physical structure, a portable structure like a tabernacle. But by this point in history, God's presence is thought to dwell in a much larger, more impressive temple. The whole Jewish religious system revolves around temple. It's a temple faith. Jewish life revolves around a system where ritual sacrifice takes place, where repentant sinners atone for their sin through blood, usually the blood of animals. That's something we can just kind of call the temple system or temple arrangement. But Jesus comes along and he starts talking about a new arrangement. Call it the Jesus arrangement. Jesus says, there's one here, speaking of himself, who is greater than the temple. Peter will eventually get this. He just doesn't get it yet. Verse 7. Then a cloud appeared and covered them, and a voice came from the cloud, "This is my son, whom I love. Listen to him." Suddenly, when they looked around, they no longer saw anyone with them except Jesus. And as they were coming down the mountain, Jesus gave them orders not to tell anyone what they had seen until the Son of Man had risen from the dead. They kept the matter to themselves, discussing what rising from the dead meant. I'm not sure why rising from the dead is so difficult to understand. I mean, guys, it's simple, right? Guy's dead, now he's not dead. He's risen from the dead. Like, it's pretty straightforward. But Peter and James and John are kicking this around. What does he mean? What does he mean? They don't have a lot of experience with somebody dying and then coming back to life. So they asked him, why did the teachers of the law say that Elijah must come first? Jesus replied, to be sure, Elijah does come first and restores all things. Why then is it written that the Son of Man must suffer much and be rejected? But I tell you, Elijah has come, and they have done to him everything they wished, just as it is written about him. Okay, that last part is a little bit confusing to most people. I know it is a little bit to me. In context here, this looks like a reference to Malachi chapter 4, where it says Elijah will pave the way for the Messiah. That's what the three guys have been discussing when Jesus says, hey guys, Elijah has come. He's referring to the prophetic role played by John the Baptist. Now, almost everything I want to talk about this morning comes from the rest of the chapter. But I didn't want to skip over the beginning of Mark 9 because what happens on the top of the mountain sets up what happens on the bottom. All I really want to say about the first part of Mark 9 is that if there is any doubt in the mind of Peter and James and John about the identity of Jesus, that experience should have taken it away. This has to be the day that it becomes obvious that Jesus is the Messiah, and that despite the fact that he may not do what they thought, but hopefully they have the big picture here. On the top of the mountain, the three disciples get a preview of the resurrection of heaven and the restored world. They see Jesus' full identity. He's God, unmistakable. So Elijah and the prophet Moses disappeared. Jesus and his inner circle make their way down the mountain to join the rest of the disciples, who, by the way, at this point must feel like the B team, right? Like, how come these guys get to go up, these three guys get to go up with Jesus, and the rest of the guys have to stay below, kind of stay behind? You can sort of imagine that the guys up top are wearing the A's and the C's, they're the captains, they're up with Jesus, and the rest of the guys are down below. I always wondered if that created a weird dynamic, but here we go, verse 14. When they came to the other disciples, they saw a large crowd around them, and the teachers of the law arguing with them. As soon as all the people saw Jesus, they were overwhelmed with wonder and ran to greet him. What are you arguing with them about? He asked. A man in the crowd answered, Teacher, I brought you my son, who is possessed by a spirit that has robbed him of speech. Whenever it seizes him, it throws him to the ground. He foams at the mouth, gnashes his teeth, and becomes rigid. I asked your disciples to drive out the spirit, but they could not. You unbelieving generation, Jesus replied. How long shall I stay with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring the boy to me. And so they brought him. When the spirit saw Jesus, it immediately threw the boy into a convulsion. He fell to the ground and rolled around, foaming at the mouth. Jesus asked the boy's father, how long has he been like this? From childhood, he answered. It has often thrown him into the fire or water to kill him. But if you can do anything, take pity on us and help us. If you can, Jesus said, everything is possible for the one who believes. Immediately, the boy's father exclaimed, I do believe, help me overcome my unbelief. And when Jesus saw that a crowd was running to the scene, he rebuked the impure spirit. You deaf and mute spirit, I command you, come out of him and never enter him again. The spirit shrieked and convulsed him violently and came out. The boy looked so much like a corpse that many said, he's dead. But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him to his feet, and he stood up. And after Jesus had gone indoors, his disciples asked him privately, why couldn't we drive it out? He replied, this can only come out by prayer. Pretty remarkable encounter, isn't it? So now what I'd like to do is walk you back through the lower half of the text, which is going to allow me to make some observations in three categories. First, I think there's a lesson here in this chapter about hospitality. There's a hospitality lesson here. And then I think there's some instruction on patience regarding God's timing. And then I think there's a convicting statement to be made about prayer. So let me walk you through these. Hospitality first. Think back to the part where Jesus, Peter, James, and John reach the bottom of the hill. They're up top, that whole thing happens, they come down, and as they arrive at the bottom, the first thing they see is this whole cluster of people. A crowd is gathered around the B-team disciples, and they're watching them try to deal with a spirit, a demon, a severe mental illness. A young man is in serious distress. And maybe the junior disciples, as they're trying to help this family here, they see an opportunity. Maybe they think, if we get this right, maybe we can go to the A team. You know, this would be a chance for a promotion here. Maybe they're thinking, if we do well with this one, the next time a transfiguration happens, we'll get to go. Who knows? I don't know. I'm just kind of filling in the blanks here. So Jesus walks up and he sees all this, and the crowd sees Jesus. And they all turn his way excitedly. Everybody's talking, everybody's yelling, everybody's screaming. They're animated, they're talking over the top of each other. But from the way the text reads, it looks like Jesus' eye is trained on one person. Jesus' eyes are locked on the father of the troubled boy. Nobody's really paying that much attention to the sick boy's father. They're arguing over how to deal with the hopeless young man here. They maybe don't even notice how the father is standing there just despondently. This is a desperate man looking for somebody to help his boy. Maybe he's heard about this new Rabbi Jesus, about other people being healed. And in this case, it's not happening. And so Jesus zeroes in on this dad, and he asks him what's going on. And the father speaks. He says, "Teacher, I brought you my son." Do you see the disappointment gap here? What we've got here is a kid who's hurting, needing healing. That's why the father has come looking for Jesus. If his boy wasn't in this situation, he probably wouldn't be there. I hope you're seeing my point. See, it's when people are hurting that they sometimes, in fact, often, they start thinking about faith, about God. Most people who pursue Jesus do so because they sense something's wrong, something's broken, they're broken, I don't know, but they need some kind of healing. And so they start thinking about God, they start thinking about faith, and in a lot of places, they show up here in a church. They show up at a place like this, hoping that they might find God. The father in Mark 9 is hurting because of his son, and so he goes looking for Jesus, and he finds these disciples, but specifically he finds the B-team disciples. I don't know what they said to him. Maybe they said, hey, sorry, Jesus is busy right now being transfigured, but, some of us B-team guys, we're here. We're available if you'd like to help. See the letdown a little bit? This is where I want to say something important to those of you who are followers of Jesus and are part of this church community. For me, I hope for you as well, this text is a convicting reminder that the community of Cold Lake and this environment is filled with hurting people. People wondering if there's a God who might help them heal and make sense out of the senseless. Hurting people don't show up at a church like this because you got a slick website or a charismatic pastor. Usually some circumstance starts them wondering about God. And they come to a place like this, seeking, looking for something. A man shows up at a church on a Sunday morning. His distress is evident, so much so that one of the ushers slides up next to him and asks him if he's okay. And the man says, I decided to come here this morning because I don't know where else to go, because right now my wife is at home in our bed with another man. And in desperation, he comes to a church looking for help. A woman shows up in a place like this because she's tired of living with no purpose or no meaning. The career didn't do it, neither did kids. And for months, she's been lying on the couch wondering what the point of all this is, when suddenly it dawns on her that maybe if there is a God, life might make more sense. And so she comes to a place like this. A young dad hits his own crisis of limitations. It's becoming increasingly obvious that he's medicating with substances. He's snapping at his kids, and he wonders if God might be a better way to deal with his pain. Those are all real, recent examples from my community. In the last few years, I've helped a whole bunch of people in my community mourn the loss of loved ones, including some that have lost loved ones in the worst possible ways. Multiple people, including 3 first responders, dying by suicide. One of the 157 victims of Ethiopian Air Flight 302. The young man in our community who died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound after a failed attempt to blow up our community center. A 43-year-old very good friend who died from the effects of cancer, leaving behind a wife and 2 teenagers. The sudden death of a president of a large Canadian construction company who was supposed to be part of a group motorcycle ride that I was going on with him. In the last few months, I have literally been in the presence of thousands of people desperately hoping that the God you sing about and preach and talk about here is real. They're hoping that that God might strengthen them and sustain them. So here's the hospitality lesson, church. People are hurting and looking for God, and often, because this church happens to have a vibrant presence in this community, they may come here first. But before they meet Jesus, they're likely going to meet one of you. And there's a chance that they may not be noticed. They could come here and observe you speaking exclusively to people that you know really well. They will almost certainly watch as you engage in church activities and worship forms that come very natural to most of you, but it might be very foreign to them. Or they may watch you or other churches having theological arguments and wonder why Christian communities major on majors and fail to get along, or major on minors and fail to get along. For any number of reasons, churches often miss the opportunities to show hospitality, which is almost always the first step in somebody finding Jesus. So if you're part of this church, I don't have the authority here to speak uniquely prophetically. I mean, I'm a guest here, but can I just challenge you in this church to be vigilant as you enter into this space, whenever this community gathers, wherever this community gathers, as you live in relationship with others who are part of this body, will you do so while watching carefully for those who are hurting and looking for God? People in my previous church know how much I despise small talk. I would say this all the time. Can we at least, so many conversations in the church environment are small talk. How you doing? I'm good. Yeah. At GCAC, can you at least go for medium talk? Can you at least bump it from small talk to medium talk? Can I challenge you when you're here or where you're together in other ministry environments, off campus, wherever, in public gathering places, in your homes, please look into each other's eyes, really talk with each other, care for each other, and pray for each other. And above all, I hope you have a heart to play a part in offering gracious hospitality to anyone who pokes around here hoping to find Jesus. Because your community is filled with people wondering about God, and some of them are going to come here while they're looking. And when they do, if they find you first, I hope you're ready for them. So that's the lesson on hospitality. I think the text also has a lesson about patience. So go back to the story again. When the father gets his son close to Jesus, verse 20 says, whatever is wreaking havoc in the boy throws him to the ground in a convulsion. He falls and rolls around, foaming at the mouth. It's got to be a horrible sight. So as the boy convulses, Jesus slides up next to the dad and says, so how long has he been like this? From childhood, the father says, sometimes it throws him in the fire and sometimes it tosses him in the water and tries to kill him. It's always struck me as sort of odd how long Jesus waits while this kid is on the ground thrashing around. I mean, nobody likes to wait when physical pain is obvious, right? We like our universal health care in Canada until it's our turn to wait for the MRI machine or our turn in the surgical suite. Like, nobody likes to wait when they're in pain. Well, for just a couple of minutes here in Mark 9, Jesus is sort of like a healthcare professional in our system. He slides up next to the father and takes a history. So tell me, how long has he been like this? And somehow, the father finds the patience to answer Jesus' question. He's been dealing with this for a long, long time. His comment, he's been like this since he was a child, indicates that the boy's probably a teenager. This desperate father has been looking for help, desperately seeking help for years, and Jesus just chats with him for a few moments before he helps. Time is a problem where faith is concerned. I wonder if my faith would be unwavering if God would answer my prayers the way I want instantly. I wonder what that would do to my faith. Maybe I'd be just more self-absorbed, more than I am already. I don't know. The greatest challenge to our faith and our prayers is often time. Sometimes the waiting we're forced to endure seems like forever. But we don't live on the top of the mountain with Jesus and Moses and Elijah. At least not yet. We live down in the valley, like this father of the troubled boy. A valley where there's confusion and mayhem and sin. A place where we can't press God's timing onto ours. A place where a certain kind of patience is necessary in order to not go crazy from believing and doubting all at the same time. We all hope, I think, for a restored world that's coming. That's one of the great themes in the Gospel of Mark. But for now, we're going to have to live in a world that demands that we be patient and demands maturity when our prayers don't get answered in the way we hoped. I'm thinking right now about a recent situation where a bunch of us were praying with a younger woman, praying that her mom wouldn't die. And we hope, this group of us that were praying, that God would intervene in a way that would result in new healing and a new quality of life for a wife and a mom and a friend. And when those prayers didn't get answered in the way we hoped, we began to pray that she would be relieved of her suffering and that she would pass away. And those prayers didn't get answered in the timing we hoped either. I prayed for months recently with a good friend who was out of work for almost a year. Talented, charismatic guy. I could simply not explain why it took so long for him to find an appropriate job. He trusted God's timing, but I know his dominant thought was the whole time, seriously, God, seriously. I always remind grieving families and frustrated people that it's okay to be sad. It's okay even to be a bit mad. It's okay even to be mad at God. There's lots of examples of that in the Psalms. We taught some of those earlier this year. That prayer book, the Psalms, it's filled with great prayers, including psalms of desolation, prayers of desolation. I remind people all the time that God can handle some frustration. But I also remind them that God is not bound by our sense of timing. He's sovereign. His ways are higher than our ways. His thoughts are higher than our thoughts. About God, we say sometimes, he gives us exactly what we'd asked for if we knew everything he knew. He gives us exactly what we'd ask for if we knew everything he knew. To the degree to which we know and live the truth of that statement may be the degree to which we live life as a contented person. So that's the lesson on patience. And I want to end this message with Jesus' convicting comments about prayer in verse 29. If after Jesus left them, and that would happen sometimes, you see that in the Gospels, Jesus would go away by himself. I wonder if the rest of the disciples ever sat around talking about, the day of ministry and maybe some embarrassing moments and things that happened. And I wonder if anybody came back and talked about this day with that father and the guys coming down off the mountain, the day they tried to help, and maybe how ridiculous they looked. I can kind of picture the disciples on that day kind of working themselves into a lather, trying to figure out how to cast that tormenting spirit out. Maybe Matthew was the one who kind of said, "Hey, you deaf and mute spirit, I command you to come out," and nothing happens. And then maybe, Andrew said, wait. When Jesus does it, he always steps back a bit and then moves forward and, kind of does this command like this. "I command you, wicked spirit, come out." And maybe Thaddeus says, no, put more emphasis on the out, like, "Come out." And then maybe Thomas says, "I doubt if any of that's going to work." Maybe you got to say it with even a louder voice. I don't know. Nothing happens that day until Jesus steps in. And later, when they're away from the crowds, the disciples ask Jesus, it seems like kind of sheepishly, to explain why they couldn't help the kid. They say to him, "Hey, we're supposed to be leaders. Why couldn't we do it?" And Jesus says, this kind can only come out by prayer. The disciples have been watching Jesus. They try to help the dad and the kid like they've seen Jesus do it, but it looks like they try to help without praying. It looks like they're kind of clueless about their inadequacy to deal with real evil and suffering. The disciples are too busy arguing to pray. They don't understand how weak and proud they are. They underestimate the power of evil in the world and in themselves. And so when Jesus takes over the situation, he doesn't pray a special prayer to exorcise this tormenting spirit. Jesus is not about technique. Rather, Jesus displays the fruit of a close and enduring relationship with the Father, a connection. So my concluding thought is that we all need, I need, a fresh prayer connection with the Father. As much as anyone, I want to see his church, the Big C church, and your church flourish, and God's kingdom expanded in communities all over the globe. But I'll be the first one to admit that when I'm involved in stuff like this, I can put way too much focus on the things I try to do for God. And I wonder if that's true for you. See, I think what Jesus really wants is for me to pursue him, not to pursue fruitfulness or success. Effective ministry is always the byproduct of the pursuit of God. So, my friends, would you do something over the next few days to keep these ideas alive and percolating in your soul? At least for the next few hours, maybe, the lesson about hospitality and patience and prayer. Let me remind you one more time, a lot of people who live in your community are wondering right now if God exists, and if he does, whether he cares about them. And chances are, before they encounter him in any real way, they're going to run into somebody like you. Will you notice? Will they see in you someone who reflects a compassionate God who heals and sustains with perfect timing? Will they see someone authentically engaged with Jesus who is doing life out of a humble, prayerful posture? Pursue that. Pursue Jesus, and he'll take care of the rest, I assure you. Let me pray.